Just so you know, we are recording the conversation today, and that is so that if you have any team members that weren't able to join us, they can still receive the content. So please know that that's why we are recording today. So the Urban Institute are the experts in the field for building systems with student parent families at the center. This work has been going on for years, and we are really lucky to have our three colleagues that I'll introduce in a second here to share that work with us. At the Texas Success Center, we're passionate about student success and bringing coherence to those efforts in our colleges through the Guided Pathways, Talent Strong Texas Pathways strategy. So we think this is going to be an amazing opportunity to work together to inform our Guided Pathways work with what's best for our student parent families. With us today from the Urban Institute are Teresa Anderson, Nathan Sick, and Kimberly Salazar. They'll introduce themselves in a little more detail in a few minutes, but we are really lucky to have them joining our efforts as we redesign the student experience here in Texas. Just a little background in case you're new to the Texas Success Center about who we are and what we do. On the call today, my colleagues, Dr. Cynthia Farrell, Dr. Kim Lowry, Dr. Christine Bailey, Sway Youngston, Nora Hamoudi, and Amber Silva are on the line. And together we work to improve systems and structures in our community colleges for more Texans that are coming to us wanting the goals of post-secondary education, improving the lives of themselves and their families. We've been doing this work for over 10 years, and so we're excited to add in this element to our efforts. So what we do at the center is grounded in three main principles. First of all, Talent Strong Texas Pathways is not one new initiative or one new effort. Rather, it is a framework that unifies all of the work that we do to improve the systems and structures in our colleges related to student success. To that end, we want to think about soup to nuts the student experience and what that looks like before they come to us, while they're with us, and afterwards, and everything in between. We also want to ensure that we're building programs and pathways that help students meet their end goals within our college, but also their post-completion goals, whether that is to continue into a baccalaureate program, enter the workforce, or continue through another set of credentials at our own institution. We also want to ensure that we're creating pathways to prosperity with family-sustaining wages and livable wages waiting for our students when they leave us. What that looks like here in Texas is through our Talent Strong Texas Pathways framework. It's a mouthful. So we want to ensure that we've created a system of lifelong learning for our students where they can connect and select a career-focused pathway, enter in with onboarding opportunities that light their fire and give them the information they need to succeed in their programs with us so that they can progress and gain skills and work-related experiences and then succeed in many different ways and what that means in terms of being able to complete their programs, move into a stackable credential, move into baccalaureate study or into the workforce. We also know that the students that we serve are going to continue the cycle more than once. And so we want to make sure that we're building colleges that are ready to accept students at whatever phase they're coming to us. If you've been working with the Texas Success Center for a while, then you know that we've organized the college's work into four main pillars. The first being mapping pathways to students' post-completion goals. The second, helping students choose and enter a pathway. The third, keeping students on their pathway. And then the fourth, ensuring students are learning. We're not going to go into great detail about this today, but if you'd like more information, you can read more about how colleges are implementing practices in each of these pillars on our website. The reason we're here today, though, to talk about building systems for student-parent families is that we believe that belonging and wellness are the foundation to success. And so we need to think about the entire student, not only the whole student experience, but the whole student when we do that work. And when we say success, we mean two things. One, there's a responsibility for the college to design and implement structured and supported pathways with the student's post-completion goal in mind. And we'll know that we've collectively reached this goal of success when each student is achieving their post-completion goal of a valuable career efficiently and effectively, progressing along a well-designed pathway, whether that be in continuing education, technical education, or for a baccalaureate transfer program. When we say belonging, we mean that the institution has the obligation to create a collection of individual experiences and create factors that contribute to each student's sense of belonging. And we'll know that we've collectively achieved this goal as well when each member of the college community feels valued, connected, supported, and included. In our mobility strategy, wellness refers to the institution's opportunity to create a comprehensive approach to support the holistic well-being of students, faculty, and staff within the college community. And we'll know that we've reached this goal when each member of the college community thrives because their basic needs are met and their barriers are removed, enabling them to focus on success. So you're going to see these themes throughout the 3 sessions of our summer session, with a specific focus on student parents and student parent families at the center of our work. So I want to thank you for joining us again. And I'd like to take this opportunity to turn it over to Teresa, Nathan, and Kimberly, who will be guiding the rest of our session this morning. Thank you again for joining us.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Christina, for that introduction and for setting the stage for this summer session. I hope that everyone can see and hear me okay, so just let me know if there's any issues with that. But my name is Nathan Sick with the Urban Institute. The Urban Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan policy research organization that's located in Washington, D.C., but our team is spread out across the country. I'm located in Charlottesville, Virginia. And I'm also joined by my colleagues, Teresa Anderson and Kimberly Salazar, who you'll get to hear a little bit more from in a bit. And I just want to start by echoing what Christina said, that we're so grateful for you all to be attending this summer session. This is the first of 3 sequential sessions where we're going to be able to share our data to action process with you, which is something that we've been working on for a little while now, for a few years. But our research and background relating to parenting students goes back quite a bit further than that. And I think it's safe to say that Teresa Anderson is a leading expert in the field of working with parenting students and fostering economic mobility and academic success among parenting student populations. Also, I would note that Teresa and Kimberly are both former parenting students themselves. So yeah. I'm going to set the stage a little bit here. We're going to be spending a lot of time together. So I'm very excited to get to know you all. I think I saw over 90 people already joined. So that's really exciting to see. And we're going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to set the stage right now a little bit for what we're going to be doing over the summer and today in these summer sessions. And again, very excited to share this with you all. And thank you for being here. All right. So this is session 1. Which is an introduction to the data to action process. And through this summer session, you're going to be able to examine your institution's data capacity and reflect on data insights to inform education pathway development. We're going to build a profile of resources that can be shared with students and used to guide future actions. So that profile will hopefully be something tangible that you can take away from this exercise and use to share with students and support your institution. We're going to develop specific strategies for using data to take action. So strategies that hopefully can be put into place right now, actions that can be taken now and in the future. So we're going to aim to have this be a very concrete exercise that leads to potential actions. We're going to develop specific strategies for visibility and stakeholder engagement relating to parenting students and strategies to support parenting students. But we also anticipate that a lot of what you'll learn during the summer session will be applicable to other students who are non-parenting as well. We're going to learn about new best practices to engage students and to leverage their expertise. So something we've been doing throughout our process in this data to action campaign is spending a lot of time engaging parenting students, listening to them, listening to their expertise, and allowing them to contribute meaningfully to the process of taking data to inform action. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what all this means, about where does data fit in, how is it connecting to action. We're going to dive into all of that soon here. And just to kind of recap the schedule, where we're at with things. So this is session 1, in which we're introducing the data to action process, but don't worry, it's not just introductions today. We're going to be coming away with some tangible materials and some good learning. So that's Tuesday, June 25th today, from 9 to 12 Central. So we're here for 3 hours together. We may break a little bit early. We will see how much of that 3 hours we end up using, but we have stuff planned for that whole period. And then session 2, we're going to talk about the profile of existing resources and a data summary. This will make more sense to you after session 1. That's Tuesday, July 23rd from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Central. And then session 3 is visibility and a concrete action plan, which is going to take place Tuesday, August 13th from 9 to 12 p.m. We'll have plenty of time to chat about questions, and feel free to pop questions in the chat at any point today. We're going to be looking through the chat and trying to address questions. I think, we have a lot of time together, so we'll try and pause and answer any important questions as we go. And I'm going to talk about what we're doing today in a second, but just to let you know, this will be definitely interactive. So we're going to have some breakout sessions where you'll be working with other members of your team from your college. And please let us know if, if any of the materials that we direct you to at any point, if anything seems wrong with them, like if you can't find something labeled for your college, just let us know in the chat and we'll help you out ASAP. So let's see. These sessions are sequenced, so attending all 3 is needed for completion. Recordings are available if you're not able to attend, but it's really good to try and ensure that at least 2 core team members are at each session, and you will see why soon. We're going to be having college-specific breakouts today, so it will be helpful to have another member of your team here. If you are solo from your college, just ping us in the chat, and we can help you out with that. All right, so what will you accomplish today? In our first session, we're going to review some context about student parents nationally and in particular in Texas, because as you all probably know, there's been some legislative changes regarding student parents and their data collection in Texas over the last year. That makes what we're doing today highly relevant. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about that and what that means. Then we're going to be having a breakout session where you're going to meet with your college teams and share reflections on why focusing on parents in your institution is important. We're going to learn about the Data to Action campaign, which is essentially being condensed into these 3 summer sessions. So we're going to learn a little bit about how these summer sessions are going to take data and convert them into, hopefully, actions, if not just potential actions or goals for planned actions. We're going to have a breakout session in which you talk about those goals for this process and what they might be. We're going to learn about elements of quality data collection on parenting student status. And we're going to have a breakout session where you assess your current data capacity and set some data related goals. We're also going to introduce you to some summer session homework, which hopefully be useful exercise. We've seen it help some colleges a lot in the past in our process here. And that would be this what's known as the profile of existing resources and data summary. And there's going to be some 5-minute breaks at various points throughout, so you'll have a chance to stretch your legs and take a little mental breather. All right, so meeting your fellow attendees. We are hoping that everyone could introduce themselves in the chat. So if you could, please put in the chat which, yes, and please, as Christine mentions, please rename yourself to include your college name, and please introduce yourself to your fellow attendees in the chat. I'm going to give everyone a moment to do that. See so many people here. It's great. And I'm going to go ahead and hand off the presentation to Teresa, who's going to do a bit more of setting the stage of what we're going to be talking about today.
Thank you so much, Nathan. It's great to meet everyone, see everyone here today. And it's so wonderful to see you introducing yourselves here in the chat. I'm Teresa Anderson, as we mentioned, and in order to get to know you all a little bit better, we're going to do a quick Zoom poll because we want to understand a little bit more about who's in this room. And we think that a lot of people probably have personal experience in relation to this issue that we're talking about. So we're going to launch a Zoom poll. Have you been in school while parenting? And that should pop up for you in just a second. Is that popping up? There you go. You should be able to see that. Yes, currently. Yes, recently. Yes, longer ago. No. See lots of folks responding. 75%, getting up there. And then the second question that's going to pop up that you'll see is, have you known someone who is in school while parenting? And once folks have answered each of those, then we will. And it looks like we have great response rates. All right, so I'm going to end poll and share the results here. And what we see is that over half of folks in this meeting have at some point been in school while parenting. 10% of folks in this meeting, 9%, just under 10, are currently students who are parenting. Another 11% were recently, and another 31% had been student parents at some point longer ago. And 94% of you know someone who is in school while parenting. So this is something that is important to think about as we share the statistics about student parents. Know that this is not a, this is not a small kind of marginal population. This is something that a lot of us have personal connections to, and that anyone who works in a college probably has interacted with at one point or another. I also want to just note that we, some of the folks who said they're currently in school while parenting may be student members of the college teams, which we very much encouraged the colleges to bring to this meeting. It's okay if you weren't able to get a student during the summer. But if you're a student on your college team, let us know. We have a quick form here, which we can drop into the chat. Kimberly will put it in the chat, and Kimberly's also a resource for you if you have a question that you want to just direct message her, if something's confusing. If there's anything you want to ask, especially for the student members, but also anyone else who's here, Kimberly can be a resource. But feel free to put your contact info, because we're also going to reach out to connect with the student members in between the sessions to help support you to be successful with your team. Okay, so without further ado, why are we here? So I think it's important that we ground. We had a little bit of in our room here, some grounding about who has known student parents, but who are student parents more generally. Some of you who might have been at the Pathways Institute might have seen some pieces of this, but there's new parts, so don't worry. Nationally, in 2016, student parents made up 22%, or more than 1 in 5 of all undergraduates in the United States. That is 4.3 million student parents. At two-year colleges, it's more than a quarter, 26% in 2016. But of course, we're in Texas, and Texas is its own little country within the US. So let's talk about Texas. What we see from national survey data is that more than a quarter of undergrads at Texas community colleges are parenting or have a dependent child, even a more narrow definition. And if you look at a Trellis strategy survey, which I know you all have been familiar with, it was almost a third, 31%, in the 2023 round of the Trellis strategy survey. So we're talking about somewhere between 186,000 to 214,000 student parents in Texas community colleges. That's a really big deal. And so that's why we think one reason that this matters. What do we know about student parents who are in Texas community colleges? Well, we know that almost 3/4 had non-work study jobs, and that they worked an average of 25.5 hours per week. So that's more than half time. We know that they were more likely than non-parenting students to be enrolled part-time, and that they had GPAs that were actually slightly higher than their classmates without children. So these were diligent but very busy students. And on average, they had more than one child, almost two. Of course, we can't have 0.9 children, but this is on average. So almost 2 children on average. So they're navigating the dynamics of multiple family members. And that is 3 large hats. I said when I was in Round Rock, can't talk to folks in Texas and not have a cowboy hat somewhere here. So we are wearing 3 large cowboy hats and trying to be successful in those roles as worker, as student, and as parent. So more states are recognizing that parenting students are important, and there's been a wave of legislative change to even just count, acknowledge, measure the fact that students are also parenting. And so what you see here is a map about student parent data collection legislation. It started with Oregon in 2021, and Illinois followed a day later. California passed, well, actually it started in Michigan, I should say. In 2020, there was a 1-year change where they had the state reported, asked colleges to report on parenting status, but it was rolled back. But Oregon was the first one to require that to be tracked at the student record level. California has had various pieces of legislation that relate to student parent data collection. Texas passed, I think, the most robust legislation in 2023, and we'll talk more about this, what you all are doing here in Texas. And then Minnesota just this year, actually just about a month ago, passed new legislation that they will be collecting students' parenting status and requiring other supports. But the Texas legislation wasn't just about data. Of course, data are important, but there were a lot of different pieces. So the first was that it banned discrimination against students due to pregnancy or parental status. It entitled pregnant or parenting students to take a leave of absence. It required colleges to offer parenting students priority registration if they offered that to any other groups. Required reasonable accommodations for pregnancy, childbirth, and related medical conditions. Required colleges to adopt a non-discrimination policy to protect pregnant and parenting students. Required institutions to designate a support liaison for student parents. We hope that some of you are here today. And finally, required colleges to collect data on students' parenting status, which we'll be talking about that quite a bit, because in a lot of institutions, in a lot of settings, if you don't know who your student parents are, it is very hard to serve them effectively and to allocate resources to serve them. So that data piece is almost a cornerstone to build up any other supports for student success. So just a quick motivation, supporting student parents makes sense. And I'm going to tell you why. Based on some data and various research projects, I'm going to just do a quick summary of why when you support student parents, you're actually, it's beneficial to lots of different folks. So first, let's talk about the mothers. So student parents are not only women, about 70% are. I did my dissertation research on student moms because the data source that I was using only tracked women and their biological children. But so looking at the payoffs for student moms over time, over the course of about 20 years, that when you track their outcomes, mothers who re-enrolled in school had higher earnings, but they saw declines in household income on average, and they were married for less time, partially because going back to school was sometimes a response when folks' marriages were ending. Sometimes it was that going back to school put some pressure on an existing marriage, and sometimes it was that parents who were not married had a harder time finding a partner who was kind of aligned with them. So it was kind of complicated why, but they had somewhat lower marriage rates, and they had somewhat higher depression scores at age 50. So this is kind of a middling story. They had higher earnings, but these other things were kind of middling. But this is why the success pathways are important, because when they re-enrolled and completed a college degree, if they didn't have one before, their earnings were about 3 times higher. They did not see a decline in household income, though we do see similar patterns of lower marriage for those complex reasons. And we don't see higher depression scores. So it's important not only to help parents enroll in college, but to help them succeed in achieving a degree. And we actually see those payoffs for their kids too. So children of mothers who re-enrolled in school saw gains in verbal and reading scores. They were 2% more likely to complete high school, 10% more likely to enroll in college, and 16% more likely to get a college degree. We don't see earnings gains in those children in early adulthood, but we also don't see impacts in marriage. Their moms being less likely to be married didn't affect their likelihood of getting married. And again, when those mothers were supported in completing their college degrees, we see much larger gains in verbal and reading scores. We see 9% more likely to complete high school, 21% more likely to enroll in college, and 38% more likely to get a college degree. We see them experience earnings gains even in early adulthood after age 25. The children were 28 years old on average in this data set, though some of them were in their early 40s. And we also don't see an impact on marriage. So this is important for the students and their kids. There's also payoffs to states. So we did another study looking at investing in student parents and the payoffs to taxpayers only in higher taxes and lower benefit receipt. And we looked at a targeted supportive program at public colleges. This was done in Virginia. And that it pays for itself $5.36 for every dollar spent. We also looked at a $3,000 annual scholarship, which also paid for itself about $1.73 per dollar spent, and affordable on-campus childcare paid for itself $1.24 per dollar spent. But childcare, though it had the lowest ROI, although still paid for itself, it had the largest increase in graduates. So if you're trying to get the most graduates, that's the one that'll get you there. And just noting, this is only in tax revenue and benefit savings. It doesn't count the personal benefits to students and families, the broader benefits to communities, or anything else. And finally, in colleges. So in Texas, we looked at some American Community Survey data. There are 3.4 million parents of minor children who do not have a college degree and are not currently enrolled in school. And a third of them have some college experience, but are not in school right now. So this is an important recruitment population for colleges, an important segment of the community that colleges can be serving. So just to contextualize a bit more about student parents, they exist at a complex policy intersection. So our quote unquote traditional college student really had certain demographic characteristics. I know we have to be careful in Texas, but just that the way that college was originally set up, it was largely restricted to male, upper middle class, financially dependent students who were in young adulthood. They were, and there were racial restrictions on who could access institutions of higher education. And that student really only had to navigate what we call college access and success policies. And those policies were really set up for them. If we're thinking about kind of policy systems, that was the one that was relevant to that student's experience. When we're talking about a student parent, we're talking about a much more diverse set of intersectional identities. Student parents are more likely to be veterans, they're more likely to be first-generation students, they're likely to come from lower socioeconomic status. They're about 70% of them are female. They're more likely to be students of color and to have other diverse life experiences. And when you think about the policy systems that they navigate, we have that college access and success policies, but we also have a bunch of other policy systems. So tuition assistance and federal student aid, which is an add-on to higher ed. We have employment in the labor market. About 70% of student parents are working in non-work study jobs. We have early education, early childhood education and care. We have social safety net programs, taxes and tax benefits, universal and community-based supports, including community-based organizations, public pre-K through 12 education, workforce and training systems, infrastructure, and finally, something we call situational systems, which is like immigration system, a child support system, foster care system, other systems that layer complexity onto all of these other policy areas. And when you design this graphic to look pretty, you get this. This is the Student Parent Families at the Center framework. We developed this in partnership with a large 45-person leadership council, including Linda Villanueva from Lee College was part of that group, from this group. And as well as Kimberly Salazar from our team before we had the privilege of hiring her. And thinking about how these policy systems kind of interact and intersect in ways that aren't well aligned for folks who are wearing those three big heavy hats. When you break this out into all the sub policies, programs, there's I think there's 88 little bullets here. I'm not going to make you squint at these, but we will give you the link if you want to, where within each of these large policy buckets, there's a whole bunch of different programs that parenting students are simultaneously navigating to support their college success and pathways. So this is the, we developed this policy framework and then use this as a basis to develop a roadmap for change to support pregnant and parenting students, which really is like a menu of lot of policy opportunities and practice opportunities that would support student parent success. So at this link that Kimberly hopefully put in the chat and that you have here, you'll find that framework I mentioned, as well as the roadmap that I'm going to briefly summarize. There's more detail about this later if folks are interested. So the roadmap is broken into 8 destinations. The first is that stakeholders are aware of student parent families and the conditions they face. That includes data collection as part of that. The second is that student parent families experience less time poverty and have sufficient supports as they pursue education. The third is that post-secondary education is financially feasible for parents. The fourth is that families' basic needs are met during and after education programs. The fifth is that student parents enter and complete education programs and attain good, fulfilling jobs. The sixth is that parents seeing students' children are supported. The seventh is that colleges meet their goals by supporting student parents. Again, this is beneficial to the institutions as well as the families. And finally, that research and advocacy around student parent services, policies, and investments are sufficient and effective. There's a lot more detail under each of these. There's mile markers, there's examples, there's ideas. We're working on a sortable updated version of the roadmap that you can then filter through yourself. Note there's the link here that is the same one that Kimberly shared in the chat, but there it is again. We also have a worksheet appendix, which you can use to sort of process this yourself if you want to kind of work through and see what's relevant for your situation. We'll be talking about some of these that inspired the current project that we'll be working on with you through the series. So I'm going to pause. There's a large group. So instead of doing questions here, what we're going to do is give you a chance to break out with your colleagues to reflect on student parents. And this is a chance where you can do introductions if you need with your team. You can talk about why focusing on parents in your college is important, what's surprising from what you've seen so far, and how does this relate to things you've been thinking about as part of the Talent Strong Pathway, Texas Pathways or in other discussions. So we actually have 2 breakout groups because Jamboard is limited to 20 slides. So we broke up. So if your college name starts with an A through an M, you're in group 1. If your college name starts with N through W, you're in group 2. Kimberly will put these links in the chat, or you can scan with the QR code to join these Jamboards. And then you will be able to join the breakout rooms, which will open where you'll meet with your college, and the Jamboards have the questions that I just posed so that you can keep track of what you're supposed to be talking about. And feel free to put sticky notes in. If you have any technical difficulties, just ping us and we'll come into your room and help you. But there will be a chance then to kind of put sticky notes and thoughts and kind of organize your discussion. So you'll have, I think it's 15 minutes for this breakout. Is that correct? And then we'll meet back and report out and have a little break.
All right, I think we've got folks coming back into the main room. I'm going to give everyone a moment to rejoin. I'm just watching our participant list increasing.
I think we have about 25 seconds till the rooms close officially.
Okay.
Twelve seconds.
All right. It looks like we're all back, I think, pretty much in the main room from our breakout. So we wanted to thank everybody for the robust discussions and for introducing yourselves to your team members if you haven't met in the past, and for talking about these important questions. We were looking at the Jamboards as you all went. And first, we'd like to say we know there might be a little bit of a learning curve. I know maybe not everybody has used Jamboard before, and it can be a little bit confusing at first. So we're going to have a couple other breakouts. So I think you'll get a lot of practice at this because we are going to use Jamboard a little bit more today. But if you have any questions at all about how to use Jamboard, just put it in the chat and we can hop into your breakout room and help you with it. So no problems there. We're happy to help out with that. We know it's a somewhat different piece of tech that not everybody has used, but we were watching the Jamboards and saw a lot of activity in many of the groups. We saw a lot of themes emerging. So first, I wanted to say Could you please, as Teresa mentioned, could you please share maybe one takeaway in the chat? We don't have time at this point for everybody to get a chance to talk because there's so many of us. There's more than there's more than 20 groups and 100 of us, but we'd love to see any key takeaways that you have in the chat. And I wanted to mention, some of the things that I saw were, firstly, we saw some themes emerging about the recognition of the value of supporting parenting students, about how many parenting students there were across many of the colleges who are here in attendance today. We saw some surprise or some recognition of the fact that parenting students oftentimes do excel, but could benefit from more support. We also saw a lot of concern about the additional administrative effort required to collect information about parenting students. We saw concerns about, administrative burden. We saw mention of a lack of direction or directive when it comes to how to collect this information. And so I think that's something that's really important for us to all address while we're here. And it's something we're going to talk about in our recommendations for how to collect this information going forward, and thinking about good ways to go about it efficiently. We saw, let's see, some of the some of what's emerging in the chat, thinking about the need for data-driven decisions, which is so important, and thinking about how we're going to actually use this new data, not just to satisfy legislative mandates, but to make data-driven decisions. So I think that's a really important takeaway. Texas Southmost College shares that they would like to start looking at the exact percentage of parent students that they have, and then work to find out what their needs are and how to meet those needs. We've definitely been working towards finding ways to help students understand how their educational pursuits will help them grow socioeconomically and professionally. I think that's obviously a great overarching goal. And one of the other themes that emerged that I saw on the Jamboard was there actually sometimes are supports that are available for parenting students, but sometimes the awareness is not always there among the student population. And there are oftentimes things that colleges could do to increase that awareness. So that's something that we're definitely going to talk about today. Another surprise was that other states are requiring parent-student data collection, not just Texas. So just seeing that map and how the change is occurring around the country. Folks are acknowledging the resilience and the no-quit attitude of parenting students, which I think is great. Let's see, what are some of the other themes that have emerged? I
was going to say, Nathan, I appreciate this comment about the intergenerational effects of attendance and completion on children. Obviously, that's something that's near and dear to my heart, but I'm glad that that was surprising to folks. It really makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's some really good Jamboards here. Let me just see here. We see some colleges acknowledging their commitment to serving this important population, which is great.
Why don't we encourage folks to continue to put thoughts into the chat, and feel free to peruse the Jamboard, but also give a few minutes of a break, and then we can talk a bit more about what we can do to respond to some of these ideas. Good.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So we'll be doing a 5-minute break. We will reconvene at 5 minutes after the hour, and we'll see you all in a moment. Hello, everyone. If you start working your way back towards your computers, we'll get started. Thank you so much. Hopefully you got enough time to grab some coffee or whatever needed to be done in a few minutes there. Thank you, thank you. I'm just going to give folks a few moments to sit back down. And then we're going to talk about the Data to Action campaign for parenting students. We're actually going to have another breakout pretty soon. This is a pretty short segment. You'll have more time to talk with your colleges, and then there will be another more longer segment about data quality. So we hope that this will be a nice chance to have a few more things to think about and then continue the conversations that you were able to start with your teams. Wonderful. So we talked a bit about why parenting students matter, where they are situated within higher ed, that there's been legislative change to be thinking more about explicit supports, of course, including Texas as one of the most robust supportive states. And we developed a project to help learn from some of these efforts that are happening across states so that folks are not only collecting data for compliance purposes, but also using those data to actually make things work better for students and to support student success. So this is the Data to Action campaign for parenting students, which has 3 components: building community, coaching and technical assistance, and informing policy. We are working with colleges across some of the 3 early states that implemented student parent data legislation. Texas just put that in place last year, so we're excited to be able to loop Texas in through this event and hopefully maybe future engagements in the state. So just to talk a little bit about the data to action process, because this is what we'll be going through with you all in an abbreviated version over the course of this 3-part summer series. So at the center of it is your implementation team. Now, we know not everyone has everyone here today, but the idea is that ultimately the implementation team will have the college pathways lead or pathways team representative anchoring it, student services or student affairs representative, because this relates to how we're serving students and supporting their success, institutional research or student data management representative, because a lot of this gets deep into data issues. And in fact, some of the questions we have that are happening later in this conversation are pretty in the data weeds. But if you don't have someone here today, you can always ping them to get looped in for next time or in between. The student parent liaison that is legislatively mandated for each college to have. And importantly, a current or recent parenting student. We said this is recommended because we know it's the summer and things are a little unusual and it might be hard to get a student on board at this time. But as we're thinking about ongoing implementation work, having that student member is really valuable to be able to lend their lived expertise to the project. So this team is working together in the kind of structure of this in developing a data to action plan. Again, we're doing sort of an abbreviated version of this here, but we're going to touch on a lot of the pieces. So there's 3 big components that feed into the development of a vision and goals for this work. The first is a data profile, which helps you understand who are your parenting students and what do you know about them for now. The second is a profile of existing resources. So what resources do student parents have access to on and off campus? Now we know that, as people mentioned, that doesn't always mean that students take up the resources that are available to them, but even taking stock of what's available can also help with communication so that there's an opportunity for students to see what they have available, and the college can also think about how to make those more responsive. And finally, stakeholder mapping and visibility plan. So how will you make this visible, this work visible, and to whom? So the data profile and the profile of resources we'll be introducing those today. We'll be talking about stakeholder mapping and visibility plan in our next session. And all of this is going towards developing some ideas about vision and goals for what you want to accomplish through this work. So this is the process overall that we've been doing with the learning community across the multiple states that we've been working with for the past year. And that we hope to take some pieces of this for this series. So the first is conducting a needs assessment. So that includes, from a technical side, understanding the technical and legal requirements for data collection, both at the legislative side, but also on the college side, what needs to be done. Coaching support, so assessing student parent supports and services, pulling preliminary data to inform that. And peer learning, so sharing anticipated challenges, ideas, and excitement. In our sessions today, we're grouping folks by colleges, but in future sessions, we'll be grouping across colleges for you to have some peer learning discussions across institutions. Then the next is develop student record data and stakeholder insights to inform goals. So that includes developing and refining data collection processes, collecting stakeholder input, especially from student parents, to establish concrete goals and priorities, and continuing to share strategies, new insights, and emerging goals. And some of that goes back and forth. That's why the 2-way arrow with the needs assessment, because maybe that you realize there's more that can be done on the data development and resource profiling that didn't rise to the top previously. And you can use all of this to take informed action. So on the technical side, continuing to get supports that are responsive to ongoing technical issues. From a coaching standpoint, with data in hand and stakeholders co-leading, especially student parents, making concrete plans and taking actions that support their well-being and success. And finally, continuing with peers to share successes, struggles, and ideas and strategies for meaningful change. I'm thinking about where there's ways to come together to grow the pie, so to speak, to build out more resources that are supportive of your students. And then, of course, sustaining and deepening the work and continuing to seek more insights, improve data, and evolve systems and services to support student parents and their families. So that's kind of the overview of this process. We want to take a moment to mention again that the student parent member is meant to be a co-leader on the team. So that means that they should be delegated meaningful responsibility while providing appropriate institutional support and guidance. So don't just tell them to, go do something and send them off unless they feel prepared for that level of responsibility. But there may be a set of conversations between the team lead and the parenting student member that can help build trust, direction, create mentorship, a check-in plan, sharing ideas. And here's some ideas on things that they could think about undertaking. We're going to get more into this. We'll dig deeper into this in session 2. This is really to plant a seed for a discussion that we will continue. So the first idea is collecting perspectives, insights, and information from campus student parents, student parent organizations, student government, et cetera. So kind of being that liaison with student groups. The second is creating a student parent affinity or advisory group or groups that support this process within your campus. The third is helping organize or participate in activities that raise awareness about student parents and advocate for recommendations to improve conditions. The fourth here is participating in outreach about the activities coming out of the data to action efforts, including reaching out to the student body, campus faculty and staff, external stakeholders. The fifth here is advocating for state and federal policies to better support student parents in higher education, might include meetings with appropriate representatives beyond the institution, think about where they can be spokespeople for the work that you're doing. And finally, analyzing the resulting data with institutional researchers and developing engaging materials or processes to use those data, while themselves, of course, they're students. They're going to gain valuable research and analysis experience from this whole process. So having them be co-interpreting and co-leading with the data is really valuable. So these are some ideas. Again, we'll be getting into this more deeply in session 2. But we want to continue to emphasize that student parent expertise is really valuable and has been a huge asset to the teams that we've been working with. So that's just a little bit of a kind of overview of this. This is an opportunity for you all to reconnect. I know you started the conversation. So this is table setting for the data to action plan. These are some of the questions that we've asked the colleges to start with. So thinking about, first of all, the process that we laid out very briefly here, if you have any questions, if anything seems missing. But also importantly, reflecting on your team. So are the right people at the table? Are you missing any important perspectives? Thinking about that parenting student engagement, how that member can inform the planning process and how their lived expertise is valued by your team. And then what will be challenging about this work to collect data and enhance supports for parenting students? And where can you get help to overcome these and other potential barriers? So these are the kind of driving questions for this breakout. You'll have another 15 minutes to talk with your team. And just like last time, we have Jamboards, but it's a different link. Note, the URL looks similar, but it's Jamboard B2 for breakout 2. And then we have group 1, which are our letters A through M, and our group 2, which are letters N through W, and you have your own Jamboard set up. And you can feel free to scan the QR code or put the tiny URL, which Kimberly will post in the chat. And then share some thoughts, and we'll see you in 15 minutes.
Thank you, everybody. We are back in the main room. I think we have 100 folks here. So I think that's most everybody who was in the breakout rooms. So wanted to thank everybody again for the robust discussions. We saw, once again, a lot of great activity happening on the Jamboard, which is really exciting. A lot of great themes being pulled out. So Kimberly noted that there was a robust discussion of the importance of clear and concise plans and a synthesized D2A plan for colleges to reflect on and follow, which would be really helpful. I think that's great. I think we're going to try and come out of this with clear and concise action items. And one of the things that we're going to be doing is talking about examples of actions that we're aware of from colleges in the past that are clear and concise, and also thinking about how to kind of bucket those actions into smaller, more attainable ones versus maybe larger, longer term goals. One reflection point was the lack of student-parent liaison or perspective. So discussion around the importance of compensating, having dedicated student-parent staff, and engaging faculty support. So this is kind of multifaceted, firstly, in thinking about the role of the new student-parent liaison who has been outlined in the Texas legislation. We're going to talk about that a little bit more, but also how to engage parenting students themselves, which is something that, like Teresa said, we've seen be super important and helpful with other colleges that we've been working on in this process. Just engaging students on their lived expertise, their perspective as being on campus can help colleges design ways to connect parents with resources that do already exist in a way that resonates and is really effective. And then also that can oh, yes, I'm sorry. So Teresa mentioned here, please feel free to share a summary or highlight from your discussion in the chat. So just like before, if there's anything that came out of this that you'd like to share with the chat, we'd really encourage that. Just to add on to the summary that Kimberly has done here, we'd love it if you could just share one thing that came out of your conversation that you'd like the group to see. We've also seen concerns about privacy, which we're going to talk about in just a second here. And then lots of discussions around data systems, the need for one, timelines, terms and definitions for data, and we are about to dive right into that. So I'm going to give folks just a moment to share if there's anything that you want to add, and then we're going to talk a little bit about data. And I will be discussing some topics relating to data before we dive into our final breakout session. So let me just go ahead and share this. One moment. Let me know if you have any trouble seeing my screen.
Looks good, Nathan.
Bear with me for just one moment. Bear with me for just one moment, please. Okay, we're going to go ahead and forge along. So I just would want to add, okay, great, thank you. I see somebody from Texas Southmost College has shared some insights in the chat. I definitely encourage you. It's totally fine while I'm chatting. If you still want to add some of those insights from your breakout discussion, I think that would be great. So as you know, this is called the Data to Action campaign. This summer session is a version of that Data to Action campaign that we've been working on with other colleges in various parts of the country. And as you know, it is called Data to Action. So where to start? The answer is data. So one of the things that we're going to be talking about today is how to collect that data, some concerns about privacy and protecting students' privacy, and also about maybe concerns that students might have about disclosing personal information. We're going to talk about how to define parenting students, some recommendations that we have, some thoughts about the definitions, even though there are lots of different options. We're also going to talk about considerations for when and how to collect the data. Now, there might be folks from your team here who work with data, such as IR representatives or people who work with what you would call an SIS, which is a student information system. But also, I know of the 100 people who are here right now, probably many of you don't necessarily work directly with data all the time. So I encourage you, while I'm chatting and during the breakout that's going to come up after my talk, to think about how data impacts your day-to-day work at the college, and to think about how data could help you better support parenting students, whether that's just connecting parenting students with those supports that already exist, whether it's trying to find new supports or take actions to make parenting students feel more at home on campus, etc. So even if data is not part of your day-to-day work, I encourage you to try and think about how this might apply to you and how data could help you if it's not something that you use all the time right now. And if you do use your student information system or work with collecting data, then I hope that you find this to be relevant. So one of the guiding principles behind this is the notion that when you are invisible, so are your problems. So as Teresa mentioned, and as you saw with the map that you saw earlier, it's only been relatively recently that states have started to mandate the collection of parental status. And as we know, that does come with additional administrative burden. But on the other hand, it allows parenting students to be visible, and it allows their needs and academic outcomes to be visible as well. And it provides a new opportunity to connect those students with much needed and beneficial supports to help them complete their degrees. Because as Teresa mentioned earlier, parenting students oftentimes have higher GPAs than their non-parenting peers, but then frequently have lower academic completion rates. And so connecting them with those additional supports through data and through visibility is really crucial. So knowing averages on the national, regional, or state level is not enough. Colleges and college systems would really benefit from being able to identify how many parenting students they are serving and how many they could be serving, what their parenting student population looks like, and what the parenting student population in the local community looks like, and what the trajectories are for those students, both academic and, if possible, their employment outcomes after they've graduated. So as we mentioned before, it's a good thing that you're in Texas, because recently there was legislation that was passed that states that not later than May 1st of each academic year, so that actually would have happened for the first time earlier this May, an institution of higher education shall submit to the coordinating board a report that contains the following information regarding students enrolled at the institution for the current academic year who are the parent or guardian of a child younger than age 18. So the number of those students, some demographic data, including age, race, sex, ethnicity, and national origin, academic data, including full and part-time status, graduation, transfer, and withdrawal rates, and other data as prescribed additional protections, anti-discrimination language, and the appointing of a student-parent liaison that Teresa mentioned earlier. So it's very comprehensive legislation, but as you know, on a relatively short timeframe for the first submission, y'all had your first chance to submit parenting student information on May 1st of this academic year, and that's going to continue into the future. So we're going to be talking a little bit today about some findings that we have so far. So here's some more helpful resources, and we'll toss the link to this in the chat. But this is something that we've released as part of our Parenting Student Data to Action campaign that we're talking about here during this summer session. And so far, we've been working with a lot of colleges and experts from the field, and we've released a version 1.0 of some recommendations on how colleges should collect parenting student data. So I'll be talking about this here today, but we also encourage you to take a look at the full report, and also to note that this is version 1.0. So as we continue to work with more colleges and learn more about these processes, we're going to continue to refine these recommendations and make them even more specific. So collecting student-parent data is an intersection of various different principles that all need to be balanced and to hopefully find kind of a harmony at the center of all of these circles, where we acknowledge these different components, which include minimizing threats to students. So as we know, students may at times feel reluctant to share personal statuses about their families, and we want to make sure we honor that and minimize any threats that could occur due to that. We want to share power with students and listen to their expertise. So if there's disconnects between students feeling like they have a sense of belonging on campus or connecting with supports, we want to listen to students about how best to remedy those disconnects. We want to ensure that collecting data is beneficial for students. and that it's always used to help benefit students and better support them. And we want to rely on data protections, again, to make sure that students' privacy is maintained. So here's a quote from a student that we've been working with on our Data to Action campaign named Kevin Ralph. Kevin talks about minimizing threats, and he says, students must be aware of what data is being used for and why. And we should be transparent in our data collection process. My concerns as a parenting student with data collection would be if it was used for ill intent, like reporting food insecurity or involving child protective services due to the answers that were provided. So Kevin points out a really interesting and relevant situation here, which is that there could be a concern that if a parenting student is experiencing some food insecurity, that being truthful about that and reporting that to the college could result in unwanted intervention from child protective services that they did not intend. So that could be a fear that a parenting student might have when they're sharing information about their family. So some principles for minimizing threats to students. Data used with students' consent and for their benefit. Colleges should try to take the time to explain clearly to students why the college is asking for certain pieces of information and how those data elements will be used. And this might require an information campaign beyond explanatory language shared only when posing the questions to students. So this is a potential action item, would be disseminating this information in a very forward-thinking way, trying to get ahead of concerns that parenting students might have when they're being asked to share information about their family. And I would say the key word here, and I think a lot of us can relate to this in this modern world with the way that our data gets used for all sorts of different purposes, including advertisements. Our data is bought and sold all the time. And of course, colleges are not in the business of doing that, but still, I think we can all relate to the feelings of our data being used for various things, especially data about your family. And so I think the number one word here is just transparency. Transparency with students, the ability to provide consent for collecting data, the ability to decline to share certain sensitive information about their family, and just being clear with students about why they're being asked these questions and what it's being used for. When it comes to data ensuring benefits for students, Alyssa Callender, another student we work for, said the data collection focused on the results of power imbalances, such as with student-parent homelessness or houselessness, gathered from those who experience the burden of the imbalance presents a false opportunity. The data at times are required to apply for grants. However, these grants may not provide benefit to the core sample used to create this programming, as this sample will continue to suffer. So this is a very important and personal quote that I think speaks to the fact that we should never just collect data just for the sake of doing it. And that's part of why we're here for this section, is to think about, okay, we are, as part of this Texas legislation, going to be collecting this new data. How can we do it in a really efficient way, but also how can we do it in a way that leads to tangible benefits to students? Even if some of those benefits are small at first, or maybe they grow over time as we continue to use this information to increase the supports and connect parenting students with increased supports over the year. So just making sure that the data is used in a way that is intended to actually bring tangible benefits to the students who it's being collected from. And when it comes to sharing power with students, sharing power is important because you want to build trust and cohesion with the parenting students you are involving in the data collection process. If transparency is given and student parents are involved in the decision-making and thought process of how to use their own data, more conversation, data points, and discussion will follow. So it's just important to understand that as you involve students and you build that trust and share power with them, it'll be a mutually beneficial relationship in which students help shape your policies and practices on campus, and where students will see the benefit from having a shared voice. So some principles of sharing power with students are that students should be given the option to decline to provide sensitive or personal information. So we always feel that should be the case, that students should always have the option to decline to answer questions that they might feel are sensitive or they prefer not to answer. Colleges can and should engage students as partners in developing their data collection processes. So it's helpful to have that student viewpoint. And colleges should be candid with students on the role of the questions they are answering, whether it's to support Title IX protections, attract new childcare funding, meet state requirements, etc. So again, there's that word transparency, where letting students point blank know that, this information is being used to try and secure more on-campus childcare, for example, is both transparent and also can communicate to students that the data is being used with the intent of benefiting them. And then students can see how that process unfolds. So data protection, getting into the weeds a little bit here with these data protection acts, the FERPA Act, Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, protects student data, including parental status. And it's up to states and institutions to interpret those requirements, but data can be shared in aggregate with student consent and with school officials who are determined to have a legitimate educational interest in the disclosed information. So basically what that means is that parental status falls under the bucket of other similar student statuses that you've generally been collecting so far. Of course, with any additional protections that come with the Texas legislation this year. But it is to say that while all of the things we just said are true, and these statuses should be respected and students' privacy should be maintained, it is also a student status somewhat similar to some other statuses that you've been collecting on campus. And it does not typically fall under HIPAA rules for medical privacy, which only apply if the data were collected by someone acting in a medical capacity, such as at a health center or by a mental health counselor. So this is our best current understanding of how this data collection privacy protection works, which is that generally this does fall under the same protections as other information in your SIS would fall under, and it would not typically be covered under HIPAA, except in certain special circumstances in which someone acting in a medical capacity on campus was collecting this data. And I do see some questions coming up in the chat. And so I'm hoping that folks are able to get to them, but just please let me know if anything comes up that I should address. So let's get concrete about student parent data collection. Here's a nice cement truck that shows how concrete we're going to get about this. So we're going to go through some kind of like general recommendations. And this is kind of under the notion that I'm aware from having talked to folks in Texas that, things may have moved somewhat quickly with the first May submission, and not being super closely involved in Texas so far, I'm not sure about the ins and outs of exactly how challenging that was or how it went, but we do know that, some initial data submission would have happened in May of this year. So I just want to say that a lot of this is under the understanding that that may have happened, but that going forward, there may be the chance to tweak and modify these data collection processes as it evolves over the coming years. So just because you did it one way in May of this year doesn't mean that you can't kind of tweak it as it goes forward. So here's an example of how if you can only ask 2 questions, you could get the parental status, pregnancy status, approximate ages of children, and the number of children for your parenting students in just 2 very simple questions. One being, check as many of the following as apply to you. I'm currently pregnant. I'm currently parenting at least 1 child, or I prefer not to say. So there's that option to share power with students and give them the option to not reply. It is generally better to have a prefer not to say option than it is to just have missings, because when there's a prefer not to say option, you can understand a little bit about that. That students didn't feel comfortable answering. And so you can at least have some understanding of that versus not knowing if a student maybe just skipped the question. And then also, one moment. And then also, you can see in the second one that with just one check all that apply question, if a student indicates that they are a parent, you can get the ages of all of their children and the number of children. Now, these could be somewhat tricky questions to implement in some data systems. I think some folks on here who work with data systems will know that while these 2 questions are really simple and elegant, and they get a lot of information in just 2 questions, these could be a little bit tricky to implement in some data systems. I know we've worked with folks who use Genzabar, and this could be a little complicated. Some data systems don't love check all that apply questions, but these are still examples of a starting place of how you could get all the information you need about parenting students from just 2 questions that are quite easy to comprehend. And also we note that if you prefer not to ask about every age question, you can literally just ask how many children are you currently parenting? And having those age ranges and the number of children could be really helpful, if you're seeking new funding for childcare on campus or a partnership with Head Start or a C Campus grant or anything like that. It's helpful to know how many students are there and how many children are there of students, and what is the theoretical need for childcare that might exist. And knowing the ages and the number of children could be really helpful for at least getting a sense of that. Even if you can't serve all of the children, which of course can be the case, it's still helpful to understand what the need might be. If you can only ask one single question, you could ask this one. Again, it's check all that apply. Could be a little tricky in some instances to implement this, but this gets at every single possibility, which is pregnant, parenting a child or children ages 0 to 2, 3 to 5, all the age ranges up to 18 or older. And then you also allow the option to say none of the above or prefer not to say. Now, there's some work that needs to be done in the back end with, fully analyzing this, but it gives you, again, all the information that you need about parenting students. So this is one way that you could go forward. And of course, you can adjust this to the Texas requirements for the Texas legislation, which, for example, is focused on children under the ages of 18. You could also combine any of the above with a question that says, are you currently a single parent to any of the children you are parenting? So again, we prefer these kinds of simple and open-ended definitions. So just using simple, plain language, like, are you currently a single parent? And allowing the students to self-identify, just given that things like relationship status can be very complicated. So there are a few data collection options. So a really key thing to think about is not just how to ask these questions, but when in a student's academic trajectory to ask them. And I think this is something that probably a lot of folks in this call have had to grapple with, in a relatively short period of time for the Texas legislation. And it's something to think about going forward because, you could potentially change how you've gone about collecting it. And we're working with colleges who are working to change year to year how they collect this information. So the key places that you can get this info are at initial enrollment, at course registration. So on a term or annual basis, when students register for courses, so not when they first apply for school, but when they register for courses. And then periodic nudges, which we'll talk a little bit more about, but things like when they log into their student information system, periodic surveys or one-time surveys, external databases like FAFSA, or manually flagging by staff, which would basically be staff in offices manually flagging this. Some of the times when we recommend are initial enrollment, course registration, and then through periodic nudges. You can always collect this information at initial enrollment, but then the two other times that we think are pretty good to collect this information are course registration and through periodic nudges. And I want to add that we are working with colleges who are doing every single one of these 6 options in real life. So all 6 of these options are being used in reality by colleges. And a question that you might have is, how often should this data collection occur? Because as you might know, parental status is something that can change over time. So a student can enroll not a parent, but by the time they receive a credential or complete their program, they could become a parent and could benefit greatly from being connected with parental supports. So initial enrollment is typically one time only. Students only apply once, usually. Sometimes you could get that twice, but you can only count on it happening once. Course registration is typically every term, so you can get kind of a constant status update on when students, on what their parental status is. Periodic nudges can be updated as often as you want, so you can have these pushed out to students frequently. Surveys are also as often as you want, but of course, it's quite a bit of work to do a survey. External databases like FAFSA are as often as they're updated, so it's kind of out of your control as to when those are. And then manually flagging by staff, again, as often as you want. Now we're going to talk a little bit, before we get to our breakout room, I'm going to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of some of these. And I'm going to focus in on the ones, it's a lot to go through, and you'll have this material afterwards, and we recommend taking a look at our report. but we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the key ones here. Collecting data at initial application. This is, and you may have already thought through some of these, but I hope this adds a little bit to your thinking on when and how to collect this information. So at initial application or enrollment, this is an intuitive and easy place to add more questions. It's already a nice questionnaire that students have to fill out. So it results in a near census of students. Almost everybody fills this out. And you can analyze the differences in those who are interested in the college compared to those who attend. The cons are that it's one time only, so you're never going to update that status easily unless you have a process for that. Students might be hesitant to disclose that they're a parent on their application. They might be worried that it could affect their application status. And colleges can't easily communicate the reason for asking about parental status. So they're just going to see it on this application and not have a chance to really understand why it's being asked for. Additional burden to the application process could cause some students to not finish. So even adding 1 or 2 questions to an application, making that form any longer than it already is could cause some students to drop out or to drop off their application. We also mentioned periodic nudges, which are periodic notifications or pop-ups that present a questionnaire to students. Those can be tied to all kinds of student internet actions, like updating their contact info, logging into their portal, or during password changes. Other updates, like when they update housing or student life information or campus services, or no action at all, maybe through an email, a text, or a pop-up. These have actually been somewhat popular with colleges that we've been working on to try and implement these parenting student questions, which are basically to have a nudge, usually when a student logs in to their portal. They get a nudge of some kind that links them to these parenting student questions. And there can be some challenges with that, but also some benefits. Like you can have these nudges come as often as you'd like, and they can be customized in a lot of ways. But it can also be a little bit challenging to get that data into your data warehouse and to get it merged up with other information from the SIS. Again, if you work in IR, that will probably make more sense to you. Of just the challenges of moving that data around once you've collected it through a little nudge questionnaire, which again, we've seen colleges typically do it when a student logs into their SIS. They get prompted with a questionnaire. This is flexible and customizable. Yeah, SIS is Student Information System. Thank you, Teresa. It can be mandatory, but it can also be voluntary or persistent. So there are ways to make it pretty hard to ignore these if you really want to get a good census of your student. It doesn't interrupt an important process. So application or registration, not interrupted. The cons are that if it's not mandatory or it's easy to miss, it might result in biased data. Without good messaging, asking about parental status might feel out of place. Imagine if you went to go change your password and all of a sudden you're being asked if you're a parent. It's a little bit odd. And so you need to be really careful with your messaging and how you deploy that to make sure that students understand why they're being asked, what it's being used for, how it fits into their overall student record. If students don't respond, the college might need to consider alternatives. So you could get a really low response rate from these nudges. You might require additional merging, like I mentioned, and it could also be tricky with some information systems. Like I know that Genzabar doesn't always support this, although there are ways to do it through the system. And then we've got here registration. This is something that we definitely recommend. We recommend nudges overall, although it kind of remains to be seen, exactly how well they work out in the future, but definitely some colleges are using those. But registration is a pretty good time to collect this information. And we've chatted with one college in Texas who said that they are collecting this data through registration. And some of the members of our team at Urban Institute were previously in institutional research, and they successfully collected parental status at registration for many years. The pros, it occurs regularly. So you get a status every term about whether or not your students are parents. This can also be for students who maybe are only coming for one term, but could still benefit from being connected with some parental resources during that time. Some colleges already ask questions at registration. If your college doesn't, that probably sounds weird, but we've talked to many colleges that do have a registration questionnaire And it is a robust data collection point that can be made mandatory. Pre-existing messaging that can be added to. So there's typically a lot of guidance around registration. And so you can add information about this parental status, about why you're asking for it. You have a good touch point there with students to talk to them at the time of registration. Again, there's successful examples in the field. This can also be really beneficial for priority registration in general, which is connected to parenting students. But there are some cons. There are some instances where students might not register themselves. We've heard of this happening, that in some programs, students might not go through the registration process themselves. They might be registered by a staff member. And so it's possible that they wouldn't see these questions, although generally we understand that most students at most colleges go through this process, some kind of course registration. Additional questions might deter students from completing registration, which could harm their academic progress. You don't want to interrupt an important process, and registration is an important process. We've also spoken to many colleges where at some colleges, registration is fairly laid back and an okay or an easy process. At other colleges, it can be kind of intense and competitive, and it can be tricky for students. So that's why priority registration can come in handy, but also it's important to note that interrupting that process or making that process more challenging could be a difficulty. So the last piece is that while I was talking about priority registration being important for parenting students, if you collect this data at the time of registration, then you don't really have the time to identify who gets priority registration or not. So what some colleges do is they have what's called a registration intake form that goes out a little bit before course registration. It's part of the registration process. You go through an intake form where you share a bit of information, sometimes academic, sometimes has some demographics and parental information or updating contact info. And then you use that registration intake form to determine who gets priority registration and to collect that parenting student status. So we just have a couple more, and I'm going to go through the next ones a little bit faster. But these are all other strategies that colleges that we're aware of are using. They all have some significant challenges with them. The first is surveys. These are extremely flexible. You can field them any number of times. They can be targeted. You can try out different wording or options in different scenarios. You can change them from time to time. You can run the same survey 3 different times. They can have all kinds of crazy logic. So, it might be hard to put new questions in Genzabar, but usually in a survey or in Ellucian, in a survey, you can add skip patterns, all kinds of different things. But you can also use incentives. So you can add, a small gift card or something to improve response rates and to compensate students for their time providing this information. Include all kinds of messaging. And you can collect a wide range of data and ask more questions. Surveys are great. They're very flexible. What are the downsides? Survey design is complicated. It often requires expertise and a lot of development time. It's a lot of work to run a survey. Voluntary surveys tend to have very low response rates. We're talking under 10% oftentimes, even with incentives. Students definitely have survey fatigue from prior surveys, especially since COVID. There's been a lot of surveying, and students can be pretty tired of it, and that can reduce response rates even further. If hosted on a separate platform, it could be hard to do the data integration. Again, folks from institutional resources will probably have a better sense of this. If you collect surveys totally separate from your SIS, your data warehouse, it could require more work to bring those two pieces together. And then also additional work required around response rates and bias estimations. If you want to get serious about learning from your data and analyzing it, then you want to understand who's responding to these surveys. Students with more time on their hand, with more resources, who are less stressed out, more likely to respond to a survey, in all likelihood, even with incentives. You'd think incentives would affect that. Oftentimes still, I think it is students who have more time, who are less stressed, who are more likely to respond to these kinds of things. And that's typically not the students who you're hoping to reach with these kinds of surveys. So they can be really helpful. And we are working with schools right now who are using surveys as a stopgap who are using surveys to get this information, but it's a big challenge to use surveys. We also have external data sets. So these are data that already exists somewhere, often accessible with minimal effort, that can be used to triangulate or verify learning status with other data collections. FAFSA coverage could be better than the response to a survey alone, but it's important to note that FAFSA just dropped the question about parental status. So kind of ignore that a little bit. FAFSA typically covers parental status, but as of now, it does not. There's not going to be a question asking for parental status, I think, starting this coming year. So, Teresa, please add to the chat if there's anything I missed about that. But I believe it's this year that question is getting dropped. That won't be of too much assistance anymore. Although in theory, you could use FAFSA if you get that 5% of your students are parents from, say, a survey, but then FAFSA tells you it's 30%, then you know there could be an issue there. So getting to the end here, we're going to get to breakouts in a second. I promise I'll give you all a chance to chat about these topics. The extensiveness and availability of this data varies. It's often biased because not all students appear in these external data sets. It's unlikely to meet the requirements of the new legislation. So typically, just passing on that external data is not specific to your school. And also new FAFSA data on dependents will be unavailable or incomplete. There's also national level data sets on student parents, some of which have state level data like what's known as the NIPSAS. But we won't get into that right now, other than just to say that it's not really going to give you much info about your own school, especially not student record level information. It might give you info about the state in general, but that's about the best it can usually do. Although FAFSA will give you institution-specific info, but like we said, it's incomplete. We do know some schools that have manual or ad hoc processes in place, which is basically some staff members who are manually entering data, such as when they're in an office, a student support, student life office maybe, that interacts with students. When they determine that a student is a parent, they might enter that in a data system. Staff can check for errors and other consistency issues. It's always nice to have a human being looking at things. Manual checks can be used for quality control or updating data. Students can request their status changed at any time when they're talking to a human being, a counselor, someone who works with data entry. But automatic methods can be used to do that too. But the cons, it's very labor intensive, especially large institutions. If you have thousands of students, this is just a massive amount of effort, and you're never going to be representative of the student body. It's kind of just who you happen to come into contact with. It could result in human misunderstandings or mistakes. If a student is sitting and talking to a counselor, the upside of having a human being is that they can think through things and check for consistency issues. The downside is that misunderstandings occur, and a student might not want that data to be put in a system. And if a staff does that, it could be a misunderstanding. Privacy risks are heightened. So if a student does not understand that disclosing their parental status to a staff member could prompt a change to their student record, that could be a concern. All right, so that was a lot. I know I just threw a whole bunch of information at you, but I want to remind you that all of this is written out, not just in these slides, but in the document that we linked earlier, our recommendations. You can look at these pros and cons anytime. And I also want to note that these are version 1.0. So I mentioned some specific data systems. We're hoping to get into even more detailed recommendations going forward in the future. But part of what we're going to do while we're here together is think about this data collection process going forward. So what we're going to do is have our last breakout session where we're going to assess data capacity. So we're going to do a little bit of like a self-discovery where each of your teams are going to think about your current data capacity on campus and how you use data. Now, I fully understand that while some of you all may have folks who work directly with student data systems and data on your teams, some of you might not, and that is okay. That is certainly fine. So what I encourage you to do is just to think about these questions. If you're not very experienced with data systems, think about these questions with how they relate to your daily interactions with students, to how you do your job, and how data can help you. and try and be creative and think about how more data could lead to additional options for you or to additional tools in your toolbox. So thinking through, you may or may not know this, but what is their main student information system? It could be a branded name, but also the application it's on, like Ellucian. And are there any other important data systems that you use? When and how did you collect and report student parent data to THECB in May? You may or may not know how this occurred, but encourage you to think about it and how it relates to the different types of data collection we talked about here. And does it feel like it could be a permanent solution, or does it feel like what y'all did in this first year is something that needs to be improved and iterated on, or that could be improved and iterated on, even if it doesn't need to be? How does your school use the data in the student record? Does your student parent liaison have access to the information? And where do you wish you had better data? Are there any barriers to collecting such data? So these are the questions. Again, they're going to be on the Jamboards. It's going to be the same situation as before. So y'all have had a bit of practice with this now. And please be prepared to report out in the chat. Again, we wish we had time for everyone to talk, but there's 100 of us on here. So just be prepared with one bullet point takeaway in the chat when we return from this breakout. Let's go back. Here are the breakouts, and I really want to emphasize these are different Jamboards than before. So you should see the question data that I just went through on your Jamboard. So make sure you use these links here, not to the old Jamboards. This is your third Jamboard, same groups, and just let us know if you have any technical difficulties. All right, we're back up to 100 people in the main room. That's kind of our crew, I think. So I just wanted to personally just thank everybody for the discussions that just went on. I see tons of stuff on the Jamboard, a lot of really excellent themes that are emerging. And I think a lot of the seeds for action items coming out of this summer session. And so some of the things I saw is that very few schools felt that their current data collection methods that they used for May 1st were permanent. I also see examples of almost every data collection method that we talked about here. Schools have implemented nudges. Some schools did surveys. Some schools used external data like FAFSA for this initial reporting. Some schools did manual collection through staff. I know of at least one school in Texas that is working on adding it to the registration form. I don't know if they fully finished doing that, but that was their plan. And some schools talking about the desire to add it to the initial application form or to develop other. So there's lots of ideas about how folks would like this to work going forward. And like I said, I don't know that I saw a single school that says that they feel that their current data collection process is permanent or is the final form of it. So I think that shows that we have a lot that we can accomplish together here this summer, because some of the ideas that we have, remember, are some of the actions that we want to come out of this, and you're going to hear about some potential actions in like a few minutes when Teresa kind of brings us home on the session. But we hear about some concerns with student responsiveness and getting that buy-in from students to feel comfortable answering these questions. That's something that can be really increased through intentional action items that are very achievable, that relate to outreach, messaging, simple tweaks to the on-campus experience, whether it's interacting with staff or whether it's online, that can help students feel like these questions are being used for their benefit and that they can feel comfortable sharing this information and building that trust. It may take a little while, but that's one of the things that can be done. And there's a lot of schools here. A lot of your teams have mentioned that they want this data to be useful in reporting, that they don't want it to be siloed, of course, still with protecting that privacy, and that the process has been complicated so far, and that we can find a more efficient way going forward to analyze and collect this information. And I want to remind again, I forgot to say it again, but I think it's been put in there, but we'd love to hear your one bullet takeaway, like we mentioned in the chat. So please put those in the chat. And actually, I'll take just a moment right now. I see someone say, what are some examples of nudges? And that's important because some of the schools here have said that they've used a nudge. So I know some of you all here have done something like that. A nudge could be if you are a student and you go to your student information system. So if you're at Alamo, just picking on you because it's first to mind, if it's called My Alamo Student Portal and a student goes to log in, you might set it so that once a term, when a student logs in, a pop-up shows up, one time per term, and that pop-up has a link to a questionnaire. And the questionnaire says, we need you to update some information. And it would have some more, information about some messaging about, we're also going to ask about your parental status. Here's why we're asking about your parental status. Here's what we might use this information for. Here, is what you're consenting to if you provide this information. And then it could be a questionnaire that then gets stored. And yeah, so that's an example of a nudge, but there's other ways that it could get implemented.
That's great. I think these kinds of questions are really valuable, and appreciate the continued reflection on these questions as you get deeper into this process and this thinking. I do want to give everybody about 3 minutes for a break. So why don't we come back at 11:35 Central, and then we'll just go through the last little segment of our agenda for today. And if you have other thoughts, please feel free to put those in the chat while we're breaking if you'd like. Hello, everyone. If you want to start working your way back towards your seats, sorry that was a brief break, but we are very close to the finish line of the session, and hopefully you're excited to get into what we're looking towards for next time. And we'll just pause while everyone has a chance to come back to sit back down or stand or whatever format you like to be in when you're listening and participating in the Zoom meeting. And I'll just respond while everyone's coming back. Just that the comment about focus groups is really exciting, and there's some resources that we've adapted from the Family Friendly Campus Toolkit, which is a wonderful resource in itself. That could be helpful if people would be interested in that. So we're happy to share some ideas about that, but of course it's going to depend on your goals and main questions driving your student engagement focus group. All right, so I am going to dig back in a bit here on talking about kind of our homework for next time. And this is really, we call it homework, sure, but really just an opportunity for you all to get together and to keep this work going, to reflect as a team in longer than 15-minute segments, and to be thinking about what resources you have available at your disposal already that'll support your efforts with student parent success priorities. So first, want to highlight this box folder. We will put this link into the chat. Kimberly is on it. Tiny URL / D2A Texas materials. Oh, sorry, somehow that went back. This has 2 documents in it right now. We'll continue to add to this as we go through the series. And I'm going to talk through each of them, which you are welcome to download and have in front of you, but you don't have to right this very minute. And if you have any concerns or difficulties accessing those, please do let us know. So the first is, and I mentioned this briefly at the beginning, but the profile of existing resources. So this activity is adapted from the Family Friendly Campus Toolkit. I mentioned that just a moment ago. It's a wonderful resource for colleges to explore where and how they can enhance family friendliness on campus. And we've used it as a basis for adapting some of these materials and building on it. Oh, that link didn't work. Okay, we will give you a new link. Give me a moment to, I'll get that for you in a moment after talking. Apologies for that difficulty. So perfect, thank you. Oops, apologies. So the profile of existing resources is an opportunity to catalog all resources that are available to students already at your institution. Many of you have mentioned that you have resources that are underutilized or you feel like students don't know about, and this is a chance to really put those all on paper so you can see what's available. You can also note resources that you're planning in the near future. Let's say you're developing a new tutoring program or opening lactation spaces on campus, or you have childcare partnerships that are being developed. It's a place to also note those that are coming up. But this will also be an opportunity to have, once you have it in one place for you, you can also have it in one place so that you can more easily communicate and share it with students. The profile of existing resources has a bunch of categories of types of resources. And once you've gone through this process, it gives you an opportunity to then reach out to potential partners that might come up in your search. Because what we imagine is that someone's going to sit down with this and have a bunch of things you can list off the top of your head and some things that you don't already know about and that come up in the process of having these discussions. And there could be new partners that emerge from those discussions. You can also, of course, refer students to supports that you weren't previously connecting them with. There's opportunities to disseminate the profiles on websites or in classrooms or on syllabi that will help raise student awareness of resources. This has been an opportunity where several colleges have found that there are issues with, let's say there is a website that lists, say, lactation spaces on campus and that they're not correct, or the rooms you go to them and they're locked, or maybe there's a link to resources on the web page that are broken or missing. So an opportunity to fix issues. Learn about barriers and inform campus staff so they can communicate to students what to expect that may come up as you're reviewing what's available. Identifying gaps, and of course, potentially seeking resources that help you address those gaps. And then assessing the true availability of childcare options and other supports, because sometimes folks think, oh, well, there's a childcare center on or near campus, and that doesn't always mean that that's accessible or affordable to students, either because of wait lists, because of costs, because of other considerations. Thank you, Kimberly. And we'll create a tiny URL out of that link, but there's a direct one that you can use. So here's a few examples of how folks have used the profile of existing resources. So one school found that their website had incorrect instructions for where their lactation rooms were actually located. I kind of mentioned that. One school did a full assessment of local childcare availability, not just on their campus, but in their entire community. It was in a rural area, and it was really valuable for them to be able to see what is really available from a student's perspective. Another is preparing a cheat sheet version of the profile that will live on their website and can be printed and shared with students. Many identified links to resources that were buried on web pages and hard to see, so thinking about navigation on the website. One school found a local organization that assists with educational goal setting, registering for classes, and applying for financial aid. And they will be reaching out to explore a partnership because they had no idea. They said, in all the events we had been to for sharing and discussing resources, we have not once heard about this. So that was really great aha moment for them to be able to build out their awareness of supports. So here are the profile categories. Apologies that I kind of referenced them and then coming back around. So the first are college services or facilities that are on campus targeted for parenting students. And then college services or facilities on campus that are not targeted for parenting students, but might be used by them. So that could be like academic support services or others that are available to the broader community, but might have particular relevance for parenting students. The third is key community or public services off campus that are often used by parenting students. And there's some examples in there. But those might include other sorts of social supports, benefits, programs. Financial resources, whether it's through financial aid or scholarships, grants, other sources of support. Gathering places, those can be in person. Those can also be virtual for students who aren't physically on campus. Are there gathering places that people can find community? Childcare options that are available on or near campus that are realistic for students. One of the colleges I've done a lot of work with has a childcare center on campus, but the tuition is $20,000 a year. And so that's just not realistic for students. It's really not targeted for students. So thinking about what's possible. Partnerships with community-based organizations, government agencies, or others that benefit parenting students. Campus policies that apply specifically to or are helpful to parenting students. That might be like no kids on campus policies, which are not particularly helpful, but are relevant. But they also might be other things like having syllabus statements or other policies around hybrid engagement in options in classrooms or others that could be beneficial. Campus practices that signal inclusion for parenting students. One of the big examples that comes up is around marketing and outreach and visibility of parenting students in materials. And finally, campus data sources for information about parenting students, which might be some of the things we've talked about, but might be others like if specific programs have surveys of their students or other types of data that might not always be right at the forefront. So that's a summary of the profile of existing resources. The second is summarizing institutional data. The first step in a data to action campaign is having good data and knowing how to use it. So starting with, what do we know about parenting students now using data? So you could use data that you developed for the May legislative submission or the Higher Education Coordinating Board submission. You could look at FAFSA data from what you have right now. You can look at another source or a combination of sources, but this is just trying to use whatever the best data is that you have to try to give a profile of what your parenting students look like from what you can know to date. So that's a spreadsheet that you'll be able to fill out. There's an opportunity in that spreadsheet to choose another, if you want to kind of benchmark against another student group, you can identify that group in the spreadsheet. For example, if you want to benchmark against first-gen students or female students or another student group that feels important for you to identify, there's an opportunity to do that in the format, and you can change. I mean, this is all a template for you to look at and see what makes sense for your institution. So you can add breakouts and you can slightly change categories if it makes more sense for your own data situation. So the homework for the next session is to complete a preliminary profile of existing resources. Of course, save that document where all members of your team can work on it. You get creative, do some sleuthing, use the internet, ask around, and then completing a preliminary institutional data profile. So to the extent that you can use your current parenting student data, reflect on the self-discovery questions that you all have already talked about and consider where it's harder or easier than you expected. That process in itself is learning. It's not just about the product. But try to use different data sources if you can. You can be creative and resourceful and have it be prepared to sort of report back and reflect on what you've learned from that process as we get back together in a few weeks. So that's a kind of note here. Come to the next session prepared to share at least one insight from each, and we'll have a structured discussion and brainstorm actions we can all take. And there will be an opportunity to also do that across institutions as well, which we think will be valuable for building community and connection. So that is the homework. Of course, you may have questions about what I just shared, especially if you hopefully been able to access the new link. But yeah, any questions, any final reflections, folks can feel free to share those in the chat. Or if you want to raise your hand or come off mute and share anything, we're happy to hear those. And while you're sharing those reflections, and we also have our contact information, we wanted to put up the post-session survey link, which we will put into the chat. We will share out the recording. We will share out the slides. We'll share out the PDF of the Jamboards that folks worked on. Hopefully it's okay with you all, but just to be able to kind of see across. And we will also look at additional resources that came up in our discussion and make sure that those links or PDFs are readily available for you. But yeah, any questions, any reflections, thoughts? We've really appreciated this time with you this morning. And we just are excited to be doing this work with a great state.
Well, while people are collecting their thoughts, I would just like to extend our gratitude from the Texas Success Center and the 27 colleges on this call to your team, Teresa, Nathan, and Kimberly, for sharing this expertise. I know it's an exciting opportunity. And sometimes legislative changes can seem daunting, but this is one change that really, I think the intent is great to support our parenting students. And we know that they exist across our campuses. So not only do I hope that this first session whet your appetite to come back for the next two in terms of creating systems that make sense to comply with the legislation, but also that really makes sense for student success. And so I feel that this was a great introduction to that. So I'd just like to extend my gratitude to you and your team at the Urban Institute for sharing your expertise with us, and know that we're looking forward to the next two sessions. To our attendees, if you would please take a minute right now to do our survey. It is very brief, I promise. We really value how your thoughts on this experience, and we will use that as we plan the next two sessions. And I will be sending out a correspondence probably on Thursday to all of the attendees. It will include the slides, it will include the recording and other resources that we shared here today, as well as registration links for session 2 and 3 if you're thinking of new team members you'd like to invite to come back for the next sessions. So you can expect that correspondence from me here probably on Thursday with those resources as well. So I just wanted to let you know they will be coming your way. So again, I just wanted to say thanks. And of course, we have a couple minutes. So if anybody else would like to come off mute and share your thoughts, please feel free to do so.
Thank you so much, Christina. We just really appreciate having the opportunity to be here with you. I wanted to also highlight for any students who were in this session, if you didn't get a chance to fill out the form that we said earlier, please do fill it out. We're going to invite students to have a conversation with us in the interim between the sessions as we prepare for talking more about the parenting student role in our next get together. And so this will be a way that we can know how to reach you, and we will look forward to that conversation. Unless there are other questions, we're going to say thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of the week, a wonderful rest of the day. A happy 4th of July holiday. It's coming up soon, and we'll be seeing you all again soon.
Yes. Take care, everybody. We'll be in touch in a couple days and see you in a couple weeks.